Okay, hi, hello, how are you? I hope all is well. My name is David Parsons. You are listening to Nostalgia Trap. We have been lately doing episodes entirely about single films, individual movies, but really conversations that burst out of those films, and hopefully we've chosen films that allow us to sort of get into larger questions of cultural politics and art, etc. I think this conversation is a really good example of what I like to do with these movies. This one is Eraserhead. Now, this is a big one for me, and I think for, in the history of cinema. Eraserhead is David Lynch's first feature film, came out in 1977, has a very particular history in terms of its production, in terms of how it was made, the process through which Lynch raised money and actually made this thing is sort of legendary, and there are a lot of pieces to it. So I wanted to talk to someone who sort of could talk about the larger issues of like making art and the politics of that in the 21st century and how that might have changed since Lynch made this film in 77. So we're talking with Tyler Scruggs today. Tyler's someone who I met on Twitter. He is a musician and writer, someone who has a lot to say about not only David Lynch, but sort of how Lynch fits into maybe wider ideas of what's happening in the culture and how things have changed. So this was a really, really fun conversation. And Eraserhead, I just watched it again. It's always a very unique delight to watch Eraserhead. There's always a moment. I mean, I'll talk about this on the live stream later this week, perhaps. At some point on the live stream, I'll talk about this. But, Lynch has a certain kind of occult power over me in particular. There are things that happen to me when I watch David Lynch films, and Eraserhead is certainly like Lynch at his purest and most powerful. There's always a moment watching Eraserhead, maybe 20 or 30 minutes in which I have completely surrendered to whatever magical thing he's doing, and I am lost in this. I mean, you talk about ego loss that happens when like taking psychedelic drugs. That's sort of what happens at some point of Eraserhead for me. And I don't know if that is true for you or if that will be true for you if you've never watched the film. But there's a unique magic to it. We'll put it that way. And I think that Tyler goes a long way to describing what that magic is, and also sort of the, like I said, that's sort of like the terms of production of a work of art like Eraserhead. How does that fit into our world, particularly with social media, with sort of the online culture? And this was a really fun conversation. So go watch Eraserhead if you haven't already, and even if you have, go do it again. And I say do it because Eraserhead really does function in a sort of dreamy, drug-like sort of space for me, and I think it does for a lot of people, and that maybe explains why it became such a huge cult midnight movie thing. So this is a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. We've got lots more Nostalgia Trap stuff all over the place, including lots of these movie episodes we've been putting up on the Patreon. If you want to support our show, we really need it. We are indie media, and I mean that like really. We don't have any support from anybody besides our listeners. So if you like our stuff, if you don't have money to give us, you can share our stuff on social media and explain why you liked it. Leave a comment and a review on iTunes. All of that stuff helps us and helps build the show into what we want it to be. But if you want to subscribe to our show, you can do that at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Lots of bonus material, lots of fun stuff for our subscribers. And thanks so much for the people that are doing that. All right, let's get into this. This is me and Tyler Scruggs talking about the one and only Eraserhead. Okay. Tyler Scruggs, thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it. I've been reading your tweets for a long time and very happy to meet you in person.
Oh man, thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You are one of many, and I'm sure it's not an accident, one of many people on my Twitter timeline who talk about David Lynch all the time. So there's many different, I feel like there's many different avenues you and I could go down in terms of pop culture, and we probably will in this conversation, but we agreed that we would watch Eraserhead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just so thankful that this show does have something of an objective, because I've been doing a lot of pods recently, especially like quarantine born ones that are just so abstract, and like they're not bad at all when the people are, vibing. But I feel like oftentimes when I click on something, it's with a very clear like objective of what I'm trying to get out of it, and I'm happy.
Yeah.
That
Well,
this has a Lynchian Eraserhead objective. Thanks for clicking on this because you took interest in that as well as
Right. No, I know exactly what you mean. Like, we're not just because we did the vibe checks at the beginning of quarantine where we were just kind of like, let's just riff about the quarantine and that sort of thing. But that I think became a genre unto itself really, really quickly, and that's part of why this plus the election is part of the reason we wanted to like do some episodes that are just literally about things, specific things. And like I've been doing on the live stream, I really want to catalog. It's a narcissistic project in some respects, because I want to catalog sort of more seriously what are the works of art and the pieces of pop culture that like formed me as a human being. All that kind of thing. And Eraserhead is not one of them. I'll say that. Eraserhead's a late Lynch one for me. I've been obsessed with David Lynch since the 90s. But Eraserhead's not a film that I watch. I think part of me was like scared to watch it.
Sure.
Yeah. So I've only seen it and I've been watching it a ton, and I've probably watched it maybe 12 times in the last like few years just to like get to know it. But watching it last night, I sent you a message on Twitter and you responded because I was just making sure. Did you watch it? How did it go? And you said, such a vibe. And I thought that's maybe one of the best descriptions, because it's hard to describe this movie, right?
Yeah. And this weekend was strange, in particular, just with the volume of black and white films I was consuming. Like, I was just watching a lot of black and white film, like Citizen Kane, Mank, and like those two films in particular, especially when you bring Eraserhead into the mix, like for me, it fires off a whole bunch of neurons of like, auteur theory and like fascism and how that plays out like interpersonally and like realizing artistic dreams. And this, Eraserhead being a passion project student film, like kind of makes it the best student film of all time.
Yeah.
Because there are genuinely groundbreaking things, specifically in sound and sound design that's going on, that like Fincher will definitely later use. It's prototypical of the brand new things that we're consuming. But in that DM conversation, I was talking about George Lucas, because the thing with watching movies in the 2020s, at least for me, is like you are multi-screening it. I did not actively watch Eraserhead. I've seen it several times, and it's not hard to follow once you get it. The experience of it is something to experience, but like the themes are not super far-reaching. Like it's a very straightforward story. And to think that like it came out 2 months before Star Wars is just interesting, because I feel like the later trajectories of both of those artists were obviously very much shaped by those two specific films. So like seeing them as contemporaries is not something as a young person I do very often. So that was a nice rabbit hole.
Yeah. And isn't that, wasn't Lynch going to direct one of the Star Wars movies? Isn't that part of the story?
Yes. Lynch was brought in and asked to direct Return of the Jedi. And I found this amazing quote from Lynch where he was like, George took me upstairs and showed me these drawings of these things called Wookiees, and then the headache set in. I knew I could never direct a Star Wars film. And I'm like, that's probably exactly how it went down for him, because like the cool thing about art is that for the artist, it is obligatory. Like you're impassioned, David Lynch specifically, to realize this dream that is very much a specific dream about a specific fear, told in the most abstract way possible.
Right.
And
what is that fear? Is it I mean, the theme of reproduction is pretty on the surface. I love how you're like the story is very straightforward. I'm like, a lot of people would say it's not, in terms of its themes, etc. And I did watch a whole bunch of like the additional material that's on Criterion Channel, which is really cool. There's stories. There's like a thing of Jack Nance, who's the star of Eraserhead.
Oh yeah,
with David Lynch driving around LA in the '90s, which is really cool. But at the end of the Eraserhead Stories little documentary, which is just Lynch himself talking into a microphone, it's almost like a podcast. He says, I've read all the interpretations over the years of what Eraserhead is and what people think it means. And I can just say that none of them have gotten it right. And I thought, wow, that's something for him to say that, because it seems like, watching it last night, I was like, oh, this is pretty clearly about, reproduction, physical reproduction, and it's sort of like the anxieties surrounding that.
Yeah.
But, at the same time, I hear this story of Lynch saying the movie didn't come together to him until he read a verse in the Bible, which he can't remember the Bible verse, but he says he literally like cracked open the Bible, and just looked at one random line, and that explained the film to him, and he was able to move forward. So there's a lot
fascinating.
Of isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Yeah. In my Letterboxd diary entry for this recent Eraserhead showing, I found this quote because we were talking about the memoir too, and I'm like, I'm dying to read the memoir, but I'm like drowning in books right now. Like I have no FM credits. I'm at my capacity. But in one of the profilers on Lynch in The Guardian, the headline was like, "You have to be selfish," and that was in response to kind of his rocky interpersonal relationships. Like he kind of said, like, I never wanted a daughter, like I never wanted a wife or a family. These things kind of just happened. And he's saying that now 40 years after Eraserhead. And so like these anxieties, these fears are all present, and they're that sense of loss, or not even loss, but disenfranchisement from like the idyllic 50s American dream that everyone was sold. But Lynch has been able to find like really those depths and bring them to light, and Eraserhead very much does that. And it definitely can be interpreted in so many ways, but you can't have your cake and eat it too when it comes to auteur theory. Like I'm watching the film, and 40 years later, you're living your life this way. Like it's okay. Yeah, it's okay if you don't get Eraserhead. But like,
I love that. Yeah.
But like I kind of see it.
Yeah, and you do some death of the author work there too, right? Who gives a fuck what David Lynch thinks this film is about? And I think he would part of him would agree with that, because his whole thing about like consciousness and dreams and sort of like finding the stuff that almost comes from outside or comes from someplace inside or something. That's his process, and he talks about like he doesn't like literally. He talks about the daydream a lot. He doesn't like people. I think people think that he like sleeps and like wakes up and like writes his dreams down or something. But he says it's more like a state that he puts himself in. It seems like that's a key to understanding art too. Is like, what is that state?
It's the meditation stuff, honestly. And like, it's reductive to call it the stuff, but like transcendental I read this book earlier this year, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. And she likens, our current, attention economy sphere that we live in, like inversely to bird watching, in the sense that like bird watching, you can't go out and find a bird. You have to like go and do nothing and simply listen and sit and be still. And when it comes to dreams, when it comes to bird watching, like you're stricken with like allowing the thing to happen to you and to simply be the conduit of that thing happening, of that idea manifesting, like is not something that you can grind in a corporate way, like Lucas, like
right.
And so like Lucas killed Star Wars for himself. Like, and like hit the quote most recently in that like is completely the opposite of the David Lynch stuff in that Star Wars Archives book that just came out, because he said that he sold Star Wars because he wanted to spend more time with his family, and he felt like he was done with that like part of his life. And so like very different, very different journeys, obviously.
Right.
And I think that like because Lynch knows that, and this is totally projecting, and if you're listening to this, Lynch, I'm sorry. Okay. But like he holds really tightly onto his films. Like those films are his, the way that like George perceives, Star Wars 77 as his, and like something that like he controls. And when you have that kind of rigid hold onto it, as the artist, as the author, like you're not allowing it to die and be like remixed and consumed and TikToked the way that like the modern world it lives in.
That's interesting. I'm trying to think of like Lynch memes now, because I'm trying to think, are there memes that are common images from Lynch movies that we would recognize?
I mean, I'm in several Twin Peaks specific memes.
Yeah, you're right. The Twin Peaks is more than anything. It's the Twin Peaks that gets me.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it, appropriately so. I was
just thinking of Mulholland Drive memes and like Straight Story memes. I don't really see a lot of that stuff.
I don't see it either, but also the accessibility to those films are an issue. So like if like every release that you do is like this tightly held thing, and like you can't there's I think like Inland Empire, Lynch owns the rights to, and it's not streaming anywhere. You can't buy it. Like
I have some sort of like European Blu-ray of it.
Exactly.
But it's difficult to watch. It's got one of those things that you have to like, regions and shit. You got to change.
Which is why I'm really happy. Like I love his David Lynch theater project, like from this year. Like I do like watch his weather reports every day still.
Me too.
And whatever surprises that he has. And it's been nice to see like the curtain pulled back. But I also like Netflix is like the right home for him. So like whatever he's doing at Netflix, it's fine, because they're just going to give him money to have something to click on and meme. And
what do you think of that selfishness? Because it's something that we've talked about a lot in my household. It's sort of like, we don't have children. And we watched I'm a little bit older than you, Tyler. We watched all our friends have kids, and we thought of ourselves as professors, if not artists, but people certainly within that world, wanting to create. And we thought about kids within that sort of economy. And there are definitely books, especially by women artists, who write about like, is it possible to like have that space that you need to like get have the bird show up if you're also running a domestic world that includes spouse, children, and in running it like literally the economy of a household. It's something that Lynch, it's weird, because what is required for him to sort of get to his place is a lot of solitude. And as I understand it now, he's sort of like in the back house of that big Hollywood Hills house.
Yeah.
And the last thing I read is that when he was doing Twin Peaks, he learned that he could like black out the windows in there, smoke cigarettes all the time, and have a bed that was a twin bed where he can, sleep when he needs to. And, I'm reading an interview with his wife, his current wife. She was, saying she knows that that's basically where he wants to live, is like he wants to live and dream and be in one room by himself making art. I was like, how the fuck do you balance being a human being and doing that?
It's a very Abed in his Dreamatorium.
Right.
Like, to put it reductively, but I guess it's just a values judgment in the sense that like the media you're being propagated one thing about procreation, and you're also like biologically like inclined for this, and so um
Hence Eraserhead.
yeah, like advertising and marketing is hacking that like natural part of the self that wants to procreate. But I do think that but if you have, those are other dreams to foster.
Yeah.
When you have more people, that's more dreams to like foster.
Well, I mean, just to pause right here. David Lynch's memoir is called Room to Dream.
Yeah, and so it's like the story of a man who like deeply wants to be left alone, and that's what, and like the fact that his like memoir is split, as autobiographical, personal memoirs, as well as like I haven't read the book, but another half of it is other people talking about David Lynch or like their experience with David Lynch, and I think that that's fascinating, and it's a postmodern way of looking at the memoir or the autobiography, because of course you're talking, it's the perspective of how you perceive yourself. Like when you're clearing your head and you're clearing your thoughts, you're also clearing your perception of you. Like you're eliminating your self-awareness when you black out the windows and don't speak to anyone. It's almost like I don't wish to be perceived.
Right.
Which is totally an understandable like conceit, but my challenge as an artist or writer or creative is the fact that like everything has been gamified and monetized, so that like I can't just not tweet because I don't have the name recognition or whatever. Like if I want to be known for my writing, I have to write and do things and think things, and share those things publicly, which adds to the stress of Twitter, definitely. But it helps me understand its like necessitation. Like if I'm gonna artistically pursue something, it's been the best tool at like connecting me with artists and allowing me to think things publicly.
Yeah.
So, does David Lynch have an alt, where he's just like reading his name in the dark? Like, is there a phone glow in this pitch black room, Mr. Lynch?
Right.
I'm sure there is to some degree. Maybe there's not. He's like,
it's weird because he's like, I think of him. And if you, in the memoir, which is written in a really particular style, I mean, and I really loved it because it's the first, each chapter is just like, the first part of the chapter is this, a story told like by a journalist, like this is Lynch's story. And then the second part of the chapter is Lynch himself sort of telling the same story and saying, here's what was wrong about this, and here's what was right about this. And it's really comes off as a very sort of thoughtful thing where you're sort of like thinking through a lot of these sorts of well, I don't know, milestones in his life. And one of them that you've probably heard is that he at some point heard that there was a guy on his block, someone's father that was a painter, and that allowed, and he went to this guy's house, and when he talked to the kid whose father it was, the kid said, "Oh, my dad's a painter," and Lynch thought, "Oh, he paints things, like he paints houses, like an industrial painter type thing." And he said, "No, he's an artist. He just paints. He paints pictures, like for his life." And Lynch said it was like the first mind blowing moment of his life is understanding that you could do that. You could like be a painter, and that would be your life and your vocation. So it's like there's the painter thing, and then what part of what appealed to him was the lone, this being alone, being a painter. And sort of like he said, the idea of drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and working on paintings and sculptures by yourself all day is perfect. But it's not just that he got married and had kids. Like he made movies. Like movies are not something you make by yourself. And that,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
And that part of it seems weird to me. Like we're sitting here being like, does he have an alt? Does he like look at his phone? And it's like, well, he has a whole world of Hollywood. It's really weird that a guy like this would have to navigate it, or would even want to navigate it.
Yeah, and I think he doesn't, especially after Dune. which is another film I saw for the first time very recently. And because I received the book as a gift in 2012, didn't finish it until about a month ago.
It's a big book.
It's a big book, and I watched Dune, and then I watched Jodorowsky's Dune, because what fascinated me about Dune was like the unadaptability of it, and all of these people are so influenced by it, but it's a dream. It's a very well thought out dream that like did not fit in like the 1984 we need another Star Wars movie structure, and that's kind of been the question on my mind lately. And it's the question that like Lynch poses in The Return of like, is it a film or is it a television series? And the running theory, I haven't like really written this down, but like cinema necessitates time. And like film professors that I talk to talk about films as events. Like this came out and happened, and this was the fallout and the result. And that was very much the case with The Return and watching it week by week in 2017, because it was a shared experience with a lot of people, in a way that like the Netflix binge watching like consumption pattern like doesn't do. So it was like this active participation in a moment in time, not just like an engagement with a media. And so when I see, when I see this question pop up, it's like, I know that the way that we're watching movies is changing how Netflix and Amazon are making movies in the corporate way. Like adult dramas, like it makes budgetary sense to like book these big actors, and like you're going to build the sets anyway, film 3 more hours, 4 more hours, 6 hours of this content, because you have to tear it all down anyway. And when I worked on some movies a couple years ago, like realizing how it was like starting a business and then going out of business, like for 4 months. And that there's a lot of inefficiency in that, but it was also like a very old Hollywood way of making a film where like, here's $40 million, go do it. As opposed to like, we have like meticulously, like algorithmically made this, and now we need you in Georgia to execute it. And so like the Georgia film scene is booming. It's crazy, but like it's a execution of dreams in California, as opposed to like artistic realizations in a collaborative like sphere. Because the like Jodorowsky's Dune, like that didn't happen. He's still obsessed with it like to this day. But like that team went on to design Alien, and like right, like those artists made it work in that big Hollywood structure. And I think Lynch always knew he existed outside of that. But the people that really, really fascinate me are the people who aspire to achieve within those systems, knowing full well how rigged they are.
Well, I mean, that's part of the frustrating thing about reading Lynch's memoir is on the one hand really keying in to his method and his style, his attitude towards Hollywood, etc., and also like lamenting the fact that like there's only one David Lynch, and he's kind of forged a singular path, and I don't think there's going to be another one. No. And maybe that's a good thing. But either way, we've gotten this gift of this sort of weird hybrid of a guy who has had the support of Hollywood to create visions that are that stick out, and it's sort of interesting to me. I always love the fact that like the first Twin Peaks, the first series, it falls apart when Lynch leaves. In part, and I know people like this stuff that's not Lynch. I know people there are fans of it, and some of it's good. But the fact that they sort of like lost their way, the studio is sort of like they didn't know what Lynch was. They thought, what is Lynchian? What does that mean? And they were sort of lost, and it sort of meant that, well, Lynchian to us means it's kind of random, and we just throw a lot of random stuff at the screen and see what happens. And in other words, it felt like they couldn't really duplicate like whatever he was doing, and that part of it is interesting to me. Like they kind of like, you need Lynch to make Twin Peaks, although I think that other people are you might feel differently. Some people are fans of the second and third, the second, I should say.
So the thing, I had this feeling last week watching The Mandalorian, a film Mandalorian is cinema, I guess, by my definition. But the thing about the second season of Twin Peaks is that he was forced to reveal who killed Laura Palmer in the middle of it, whereas his vision was that like that was not a question to answer, which I think in modern iterations is almost like J.J. Abrams' Mystery Box, where like the man is like fantastic at a pilot, and which is like fantastic at asking questions, but doesn't have a lot to say in terms of like providing answers or insight or themes to those questions. He loves the journey, and so like Twin Peaks was almost like a prototypical way of going about that, and I felt that way watching the second most recent episode of Mandalorian, where we finally get a bunch of exposition on Baby Yoda, and and Ahsoka Tano shows up, like, and as like a Clone Wars fan, like Ahsoka Tano is the 21st century like Star Wars hero. Like that is like, if I had my way, like that would be the protagonist of all the films, because we're in this postmodern world, and like what people loved about The Last Jedi, to go on a slight Star Wars tangent, is like the deconstruction of the mythos of the religion of Jediism, and the accessibility of it. And so like what hurt so much about Rise of Skywalker was like the eugenics of like, no, this is a biological thing, the Force is biological, and like only some people have certain access to it, okay, which is like a habit in recent Disney films. I don't know if that's like
it's in the blood.
Yeah, like Mulan changed the origin story to in the blood. Star Wars is in the blood.
That's freaky.
Super freaky. And it's like, oh, you have this magical inclination. And
the fact that they change it to that, like they're like, we need to change it to this, is really, that's what makes it freaky to me. It's like, why that decision? But yeah, go on. I'm sorry I interrupted your Star Wars thing.
No, I mean, but that's when death of the author becomes impossible to avoid.
Oof,
because then you have projected worldviews in a certain piece of media that like once it's unveiled, like you can't unknow that. Like and that's kind of been my my self-investigation, but also kind of like the media investigation of like what I consume, is like Luke Skywalker is a protagonist that longs for something greater, but he doesn't know that he has specialness in him to harness. And when you compare that origin story to that of Harry Potter, someone who knew from birth that he was above his circumstances and like better than his shitty family, he has unexplainable magical abilities that frustrate him, and then the story begins when he's told, oh yeah, you're right, you're actually special. And that I think has really fucked with millennials' brains, where where we're all waiting for our Hogwarts letter to like be validated in our specialness, as opposed to like the actual interesting thing of like, hey, let's see Han Solo use the Force, the skeptic who becomes a believer. Like that's inspirational, that's aspirational, and that's meditation, that like it speaks to a truth in life. God forbid, our media does that.
I think it's really great that what you decide. Think if you're identifying that, like feeling betrayed by a story, or feeling like the story goes in a place that you didn't want it to go, and that can feel very like personal, and it feel like I'm not like people stop watching shows because it I mean, I remember Orange Is the New Black. That I didn't watch that show, but I remember people talking about it all the time on social media. Characters die. Characters leave, characters do things that you don't expect them to, and people literally quit watching the show. I'm not watching this anymore. And that's amazing, because it's like that relationship with the author seems like it's pretty tight. Like you mentioned, the death of the author is impossible.
Yeah, so exactly. So like when J.K. Rowling comes out with certain views, like you have to reevaluate the text and be like, oh wait, like those Gringotts goblins are really problematic, so then it all kind of falls apart from there. And so now I have no interest in ever attending Harry Potter World, and like I camped out for every one of those books.
Heartbreaking. And this is because a J.K. Rowling's a TERF, right?
I mean, yeah, but it goes beyond that. It's. I
mean, she sucks. I don't disagree.
It's like her, but like Orson Scott Card has shitty views, but I can enjoy Ender's Game, like because there's no www.orsonscottworld.com where he's like constantly meddling with his work in the way that like J.K. Rowling like was given free reign to like meddle in her work. And so like her work was ruined way after after the series ended. It probably started with Dumbledore is gay, a great piece of exposition that should have been in the fucking text. Like, like if that's something that you feel and believe, like, and so she made a whole career after the last, Harry Potter book being like the keeper of the keys, like of all the Harry Potter secrets. And therefore her franchise is contingent on like her as an individual, as a person. So like if she thinks and feels shitty things, like the art that comes from that is meant to influence or reinforce like those shitty beliefs. And that's what makes it impossible to engage or like
totally. I mean, I'm glad hearing this. I'm glad Lynch doesn't have a Twitter, because ultimately he might tweet something and it's like, well, if you think about Trump, and I'm gonna be like, oh fuck, now I'm gonna have a hard time reading his films. It's like the less I know, the better. But having said that, I read Lynch's memoir. He's probably only one of the only filmmakers who's like I've read this much about, honestly.
Sure.
In part because maybe his films are sort of dreamlike, and I wanted to know, who's the person that makes this, and there's a curiosity about it. But we should talk about Eraserhead, because
totally.
To me, like Eraserhead, and learning about how the conditions under which that film was made. For people that don't know, Lynch made Eraserhead at AFI in LA, and he sort of like got this sweetheart deal where he talked. He's a talker. People tend to. What's one of the things I learned about Lynch is that when you get in a room with him, he charms people. People really like him generally. There are a few that didn't like him, but in general, women love him and want to sleep with him. Men want to work with him and find him to be this like guy that they defend. I mean, when it came down to it, the dean of AFI said that like, I'll leave this fucking school if we don't pay for this guy's film. Like the dean of AFI laid it on the line against the board of trustees of this school and said, we're paying for this movie. And they did. And Lynch ends up being this sort of like creature that exists in these stables for years. I mean, I think it's like a 7-year process making Eraserhead.
Yeah, he's living in these stables that are also a shooting location.
And so he's like down in these, and the pictures are great because it's like, it's very LA. It's like in the, nestled in the hills there, this little secret place. And like one of the things that blows my mind, because to me, like the sets of Eraserhead, beyond the sound design, but the sets of Eraserhead are just fucking incredible. And he built all those, and he's like a carpenter type of guy. He likes to build, craftsman. Before he was at AFI, he was building sheds and selling sheds. So he went through his shed building phase. He describes it. He's like if you look at his hands in the documentaries, I mean, he's got like big meaty, like he's more of like a workman than I thought, more of like a craftsman type dude than I thought. But either way, just to get at the making of Eraserhead, he built all these sets. And one of the things that I found out that really creeped me out is that he slept in that bed for like a long period, not the entire time. And he said at some point, he decided not to sleep in that bed anymore. And he thought it was maybe bad for him. And like others were telling him that. But to me, that's part of the room to dream thing. It's part of the like, he's like soaking himself. I mean, to me, it's like, you get to the selfish thing. I mean, this guy is literally just soaking himself in the set and and all the craft of making the film. And I think that is what comes out more than anything when I watch Eraserhead. You described the vibe, right? Like the vibe for me, one of those vibes that's strong is this like real connection and love with making whoever made this movie. It just feels like whoever made it really put everything into it.
Exactly.
And that's part of what Eraserhead does for me.
Absolutely. It's hard. It's hard to replicate because it's not even a matter of getting everything perfect or booked or built. It's not letting go of the ideas and the thing that I respect is like the obligatory aspect of manifesting whatever he's manifesting. You see his hands a lot in the What's David Working On Today YouTube series. So like he's engaging with like the audience in a very like cool way, especially like considering his age, because like it's very easy for me to judge like being kind of like naturalized. I'm 25, so like my Twitter account is 12 years old, but it's from middle school. like
that's so fucking weird to me, dude. That's amazing. I'm so glad I didn't have social media in middle school, but it seems like a different world. Like when I say that to younger people, they're like, oh no, yeah.
No, it very much is a different world because there's a lot of self-awareness to then delete and eliminate.
Right. God, that's such pressure to put on kids, man. I mean, social media entered my world when I was in my 20s and it fucked me up. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like being in your 20s is hard enough. Like middle school to me, God damn it. I wonder. Part of me thinks that maybe I would have been able to find people that were like cool and like find a community.
Exactly. And the finding community is a double-edged sword, but I think ultimately a positive one, especially like in these more monitored mobile climates. Sure. In the sense that like when I was young surfing the internet, there were a lot less eyes on me than today, and I feel like that comes with that pressure, but also that sense of safety, because I feel like I was getting myself into all sorts of trouble talking to strangers or whatever on the internet. That having had that experience, I know that that's not an experience I would then pass to my kid or whatever. Like I would shield them from certain aspects of the internet. Yeah. Should I have kids? So like Lynch is aspirational to me because of that isolation, because of that hermit thing where his actions are motivated by artistic obligation and not capitalist manufacturing. Like, he told the story that he wanted to tell in the return and got the money that he got for it with little oversight. Like when you have that freedom to explore and really make the dream come true, like it's different than meeting a certain quota, like focus group thing, right? Being a product. And so like growing up in social media, I've learned less so how to product myself, but more like the reality dawned on me that like, to engage with this world, I must like brand and product myself in some way. So like I put out 2 records when I was in high school, like independently. And that was like a formidable, extremely formidable experience, like getting, not just like the artistic endeavor of like, I'm going to set out and release an album. But like it being a Tyler Scruggs album, not some band album, and then like getting a hate of like, oh, I hate Tyler Scruggs tweets, or like Tyler Scruggs is so annoying. I like his music sucks. Like it, like the criticism becomes personalized, in a way, but like it's an extension of myself, and so then I have to like invest and nurture and care about it, in a way that like if I did something that was devoid of my identity, like there are a lot less stakes in that. And so Twitter is like this annoying place because you can have this big account and be completely anonymous. And that makes you a little, it has to make you a little more adventurous in your takes and a little more spicy, in a way that like my face, my name, my like I'm beholden to everything that I say and do on this website. And that informs my behavior in a way that like, because of this years long experience with this medium, like I've chosen to instead just really watch what I say and do, and like be proud of whatever I write.
Yeah, right.
And so I think when you're a student, like making a film, the stakes are super high. Like this is your thing. Like, and David Lynch is the only one who needed to spend 7 years making Eraserhead.
Right.
So it's like, I'm happy that it happened, but I don't see the film as a miracle apart from its existence. So like every film's a miracle, but it's almost like like I don't feel the pressure or the conflict artistically going on in a way that like so many other films, when you have a diva production designer, a diva score, composer, like,
well, that's what's really weird about that, or really cool and weird about that Eraserhead Stories documentaries. It was funded by AFI, and he had people that were supporting him, but truly independent production in the sense that people wanted to be involved in it, and there were people that were, that were working. There's an actress in the film who worked a waitress job and gave her her wages and tips to the production of, and several people did that. And so there was like this sort of like collaborative thing for Lynch's project. Like, there's this sort of like, we all give ourselves to this one guy's vision. And it seems like a different, there's I think Lynch would say Eraserhead was made by love, like that was the force binding us more than like the studio and the divas and, the costume designer and all the different hands there. Because I mean, I worked on a sitcom at NBC as a production assistant in the year 2001 for a really terrible fucking show called Three Sisters that nobody watched. And it was a learning experience, like seeing how factory like the studio worked, and seeing like how many working class people were there, like kind of blue collar, like truck people and craft service people and delivery guys, and just like a whole ecosystem. And you're thinking, like, looking at this, and there's like, where's the art in any of this? There wasn't really. And I mean, I know that's like a weird judgment to make. Maybe the art is being produced by everybody, but I'm wondering about like Lynch's attitude towards that stuff in Hollywood and capitalism, because you look at Eraserhead and I'm like, I mean, I had a friend who's like watched Eraserhead, and he texted me and he's like, this is a film that's entirely about capitalism. It's entirely about like industrial capitalism at a very particular moment in the 1970s. And he had a reading about like wages and Philadelphia and all this shit. And I was like, is that what Eraserhead is? But I wonder what your take on that is, because what is Lynch's relationship to capitalism in his art? I know it's a fucking huge question, but it's something that I've thought about a lot, because like I don't think of him as like a left-wing guy or a Marxist. At the same time, like he's got his whole fucking Black Lives Matter shit like on his weather report. Yep. He's definitely like he hates Trump. I mean, so maybe he's a liberal, I guess. I don't know. Like, his politics are weird, but I'm wondering, even just like if we could think of Eraserhead, like it's a fucking bleak movie about like an industrial world for sure.
Yes.
But
yes.
Yeah, but in terms of direct sort of statements about capitalism, you get them more obliquely, I suppose.
Well, I think this may be a hot take, but
Hit me with it.
but like capitalism might be indivorceable from fatherhood. Um and so like fear of capitalism is akin to like the fear of fatherhood, because I living under capitalism is working against you, and so the idea of you being responsible for other people who may or may not be able to contribute in combating capitalism like the way that you have to, especially to care for your deformed baby, it's like because he's left with this lifelong thing, and is abandoned by it. And so it's like about a man who's realizing that like his life is like changed forever, and like his dreams and his desires are no longer, or could possibly no longer be like the number one priority. Like,
well, I mean, now I'm thinking, well, shit. What happens in this film with that deformed baby? And what is the dream? Because like there's like the radiator lady, which we could talk about separately. But in terms of but in terms of this capitalism thing, like, his head pops off in this vision, and it's a really striking effect. Actually, it's kind of incredible when his head pops off and his head rolls onto the ground, and his head is replaced by the baby's head, and then that head is then picked up by a little boy, and taken to a pencil factory, where the little boy talks to these weird boss men who then grind the head into pencil erasers. And I'm like, okay, well, that seems pretty straightforward. Like, this father has had his head ripped off and replaced by the baby's head, and now his head has been ground into dust in an industrial factory. I mean, to me, this is like a Marxist. This is as Marxist as it gets. It's fucking insane.
I would agree with that reading. And the song, in heaven, the other thing that fascinates me about David Lynch is his songwriting.
Yeah.
And like if I had it my way, I would spend the rest of my life reading scripts and then writing songs for those. I've done it a couple times and I love it.
Do it, Tyler. That sounds awesome.
But
I'm on the Patreon already.
Well, I mean, not even necessarily like, yeah, like it would be very fun to write songs based on like the scripts that I acquire here and there. But the idea of it serves the idea of this being singularly Lynch's vision, because there's not even an outside lyricist to bring text to what's going on. And I feel like maybe I'm a space cadet, but I don't think I read the quote from the Letterboxd. So this is Lynch speaking. He said, "When you finish anything, people want to then talk about it. And I think it's almost like a crime. A film or a painting, each thing is its own sort of language, and it's not right to say the same thing in words. The words are not there. The language of film, cinema, is the language it was put to, and the English language is not going to translate. It's going to lose." And it's just interesting to me that like he's a completist to the degree of like, I need to write this song and like manifest the song so that it serves this grander dream vision. Also, I listened to a podcast recently with Andrew Yang and Grimes.
Holy shit. Why did you do that to yourself?
Because it's a bit like I seldom listen to like the Andrew Yang podcast, but like I just knew that was a conversation that like I was like, what the fuck? And Grimes talks about reading Dune at a young age, as a kid, and she was saying like, oh, I would love to adapt Dune one day. and I learned that she had gotten funding for her first record or first couple of videos, like from like a Canadian grant. And and that's just kind of been this theme that's going on in my head where like institutional chance taking, like in the sense where it's like I don't know the structures that exist, or like I don't know how to apply for a grant, but I love the idea. I have these ideas in my head of like not necessarily albums, but whole eras where, like I love the Killers, like the Killers, like booklets and stuff, like have such stark like worlds. Like that's kind of how I like akin to it. And like Lady Gaga, Chromatica, like I just love less so the music, more so the entire corporate orchestra that comes together to make these things work or fail. And the failures are just as interesting as the successes to me. And I feel like Lynch is someone who has consciously kept his cards so close to the chest that like he'll get this, he knows how to play the politic of getting that corporate financial backing, but understands the essence of art, which is like this creative free reign manifestation of a manic dream. And I think that, those two things are always going to be in conflict with one another, especially like in the streaming age, because like culture is going to continue to get more fractured. And like, I'm very fearful of the day where like someone, I'm an Apple guy, but I'm very like conscious of the fact that I'm an Apple guy. And so like, I hope that Apple TV Plus isn't the only subscription service that I have one day. You know what I mean? Or like, oh, we only have Amazon Prime. And so like the media that we consume is only Amazon Prime. Because I mean, we're already living in it, but like these fractured realities make it that much harder to create centers of a Venn diagram. Like if the circles are all getting further and further apart, it's hard to draw the connections. And so,
I love that metaphor. Yeah. And the sort of overlap, and the overlap is where the interesting stuff is too. And that's what produces new forms too. Thinking about that lady in the radiator, that song, Lynch wrote the lyrics, but Peter Ivers, who's like a new wave punk musician, did compose the music. And he was murdered in 1983. And they never figured out who did it. They said it was like one of his friends. He's a guy that like I just like learned about him recently. He's like this guy that they say was connected to like every pop culture event of the last 30 years in some way, but nobody knows his name. And he was beaten to death with someone with a hammer, and they never figured out who did it. And they said LAPD botched the investigation, so they never will figure out who did it. And another piece of bizarre trivia that matches this is that one of the chief suspects in the murder of Peter Ivers was Harold Ramis of Ghostbusters fame, but he had an alibi. I guess he lived with the guy. But that's an aside. I mean, to me, I that whole heaven thing, I wanted to ask you, and we can kind of on the way of wrapping up our like Lynch and Eraserhead thing. But like, sure. I know there's so many more conversations for us to have about it. But in terms of like that in heaven, the radiator lady, the makeup effect on her face. I mean, to me, it's one of the most affecting parts of the whole production of Eraserhead. But part of for me, it captures exactly what Lynch has done, like his whole career. And watching it last night, I was like, holy shit! Like the opening of Eraserhead is like the opening of Inland Empire. Like it's very, very close. There's like a lot of like industrial sounds, and eventually the camera like settles into like a hole, like in like a mechanical box, and the camera then goes right into that hole, and we're like lost. Mulholland Drive opens that way. He like sends his camera. He like likes to push us into places. But what I wanted to say about the Heaven song is, Lynch seems like, I've read that he sort of combines, the heaven and hell of America. And for him, like the heaven was like the Midwest kind of idyllic suburban rural place he grew up in. And then the hell is Philadelphia, where he lived for 5 years. And he said he lived in nothing but like violence, hatred, and filth. And that he saw a woman grab her own breasts and talk in a baby's voice about her nipples hurting, and that fucked his mind up. And he said that many things happened to him like that. So in other words, like there's a way like the innocent American boy getting his mind ripped out by the city, but like it's also, his childhood in the Midwest. He talks about this story. He's like, people make this, it's actually in the memoir that like Kristine McKenna tells the story first, and then he says, yeah, that actually did happen, and it is a memory I have, that like one night I saw a naked woman walking down the street with blood coming out of her mouth in the middle of the night, and it's just this memory I have, and it's totally dislocated from anything, but seeing that woman and the sound she made and the blood coming out of her mouth in the middle of the night on the street was something that has affected him forever. And it's Isabella Rossellini in Blue Velvet, right? Like when she comes out naked at the end, it's like really, really terrifying. And I think he captured that well. But it's weird because it's like the Midwest is hell too. Then I'm like this is me trying to talk out this capitalism thing, because it's like, what is he saying about America? And it's like and what you just mentioned about how language can't really say these things, because if it were language, I would write it. It's a fucking painting. It's a film. These have vocabularies that like are necessary to get this idea across. And I feel like more than anything, like he captures that, like what a dialectic is, and like how you can take very different concepts and produce something new out of it that can't really be worded. I don't know. The heaven and hell thing to me is a kind of key to understanding Lynch to me, and I don't mean that in a religious way. I guess I mean that in like a secular American way. But that's some of my Eraserhead stuff I wanted to throw at you, Tyler.
No, yeah, I would love to hear how you divorce religion from American secularism.
Yeah,
because I think like that instance or scenario. Have you seen How To with John Wilson?
Everyone's telling me to see that. I got to see that. Everyone's saying it's like the most genius thing in the world.
No, I don't think it's the most genius thing in the world. I think he films New York, and I think people miss outside. It's the greatest vlog ever produced by HBO.
Yeah.
But like, anyway, he goes around the city and like just films things and like categorizes it into, he'll find 5 shots of like bread on the ground or on the subway, and like that goes into a bread folder on his computer, and he's just archiving footage like crazy. And then writers come in, and he comes in and like creates something poetic with all this footage of like things that you can't really they're Lynchian, but only within like, or only excluded from their context. So like he'll have a shot of like a woman standing on the street on the phone in yoga pants, hula hooping, like having an argument, and like, yeah, that's super fucking Lynchian, but like given enough context, like that probably has some sort of reasonable explanation to it, and in its own weird way.
Right.
And so like part of the joy of film, of cinema is the recontextualization of it. It's like, how do we make Rudy Giuliani look like he's got his hand in his pants? Like he did, but but obviously that was a very like orchestrated, like edited 80-yard like thing.
It's seriously like 1.5 seconds of the film,
and it's 1.5 seconds.
And within that 1.5 seconds, there's like 8 shots. And when I watched it, I was actually surprised by how like contrived it was.
Exactly.
Not to say Rudy Giuliani's not a fucking scumbag, and
exactly, but we don't.
He definitely wanted to fuck that girl. I'll say that.
Yeah, like those things may have felt obvious, but like for one, we don't need to make up anything about Rudy Giuliani, and for two, like it speaks to, they say Star Wars was fixed in the edit. Like all these things are fixed in the edit, but when you have like this singular vision, like Lynch does, like these people may be specialized in certain skill sets, but they are subservient to that vision. Like they're co-signing that vision. Like it's not as though the editor wanted to tell their own story. They're executing what was in Lynch's head. And with Dune, like he had it in his head, but then the producers went in and said, like, this is too long, this is too abstract. And so that's why every line of dialogue in that movie is a piece of exposition or like a voiceover. Like they're like, he's gonna be king someday. Like going on like the entire film is like that for 2 hours and 15 minutes, where they just like very blatantly tell you what happens.
Like otherwise this thing is 15 hours.
Otherwise this thing is 15 hours or too abstract to understand.
Right.
So capitalism is going to inform the cinema because cinema has to operate within capitalism to exist. I just but there's these new media types like How To with John Wilson, who's made like vloggers are auteurs, like right. Like that, like ContraPoints has a dream in her head too that like
right. Yeah, I mean, I think Lynch Lynch is one of the few that gets to have his dreams be sort of like, that he literally does have room to dream. It's another way to think about that, and like there's a lot of different elements. I forgive it in him in part because I love his art, and I really I feel like his sort of connection to that non-ordinary consciousness is really interesting to me. And to me, like watching, I always thought about transcendental meditation and his sort of accessing those realms through that. And I always kind of imagined that he would, go off into some room and sort of like, find the knowledge and bring it back. But, I was watching, when you watch like the making of Twin Peaks: The Return, there's a scene where he's, there's lots of scenes of him directing, and there's lots of scenes of him, in fact, blocking out the like very famous like sex scene between Coop and Laura Dern, but which neither one of them are very comfortable doing. And Laura Dern, like, it's amazing. But Lynch is directing them, and they're in the hotel room, and it's like a few crew people, Lynch, and then Kyle MacLachlan, Laura Dern. And they're kind of laughing about it, like, can you believe it's been all these years, and they're kind of laughing as friends. But then Lynch kind of like, he closed his eyes and he starts sort of like channeling whatever this scene is going to be. And he's like, okay, and he's just speaking out loud, but it's very clear that he's sort of like seeing it in his mind's eye, and it's something that he does spontaneously. I'm sure a lot of directors work that way, maybe, it's sort of like, I have to go to this space, but it seems like Lynch is very practiced in it. I wonder as we end here, because it's a big question to throw out, like how do you find room to dream in a hyper capitalist economy and a fucked up pandemic world?
You do nothing.
Yeah.
Like you really do, and it's nothing means nothing in the sense that our dreams. It's kind of sick how much like computer terminology I use to talk about my own mind. It's like, oh, I've got too many tabs open in my brain. Oh. Or wow. Like I don't have the mental CPU for this right now. Dreams, to carry that metaphor, are is a defrag. Like it's your brain getting rid of excess information and like kind of like taking two things and putting them together. It's like, are these things related? No, like let's throw them away. Or like, or they're hyper, they are related. Like let's that's what we wake up with. Because then it becomes like a thing that we are able to verbalize and say. Yeah.
I love that both of us, when we do this, we both put our hands up and sort of intertwine our fingers to show two things are coming together. To me, it really indicates exactly what we're saying here, right? It's like this is visual. I don't know. I just saw Possessor, the Cronenberg, the new Brandon Cronenberg film. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, I haven't seen it yet.
Scary as shit. And it's about identities coming together. It's kind of Freaky Friday. It's like a Freaky Friday body swap type.
Fun.
Movie.
Okay.
All right, you'll dig it, dude. If you're a Cronenberg, I mean, Cronenberg's another episode, but sure. Either way, that I love that we're doing this with our fingers because it sort of indicates that, and I think you'll be interested in that movie in part because he sort of finds a unique visual language, I think, to sort of communicate the mixing of things, and particularly the mixing of consciousness. And when you said dreams are defragged, the images from that movie popped into my mind. Yeah,
exactly. And so like I think Lynch is on record saying that like he writes things down as soon as he he doesn't keep a dream journal, but like it's a daydream journal in the sense that like he's just constantly writing things down. And I feel that way. Like as a songwriter, my process is similar, but like in an iPhone's note, like when I hear a interesting turn of phrase or something, like it just becomes this note that's carried, until I go in and put it together into, or contribute it to a piece of dialogue or art or, whatever. And I guess what I want to leave your audience with is like part of deconstructing capitalism is deconstructing your idols and recognizing that like idolatry is a product of capitalism. So like Lynch is no god. He's a lonely man in the Hollywood Hills who has the means to do whatever he wants.
Yep.
Like, so like Cronenberg,
and it's so rare to have such a figure. Particularly
exactly
that it's like, oh, thank God that such a person exists, but at the same time it's like not really a model for how to produce an art that's democratic, or an art that is
what is democratic art.
Like
I mean that's a whole other spiel, but like just to bring it all back around and like kind of allude him to Lucas a little more, like I'm willing to bet that he's a little salty about like George Lucas's like Star Wars success, as contemporaries, just like in the mere like wealth and means kind of way. Because I don't think David Lynch is any slouch, but he doesn't have Lucasfilm money, and he doesn't have $4 billion from selling Twin Peaks. Mm-hmm. And even though they occupy the same space in our brain, like the post 60s, post World War II, like the disenfranchised white guys who then went on to figure out how to balance these, realities, came to very different conclusions. And I think those conclusions were contingent upon how like possession of the dream, like Rise of Skywalker was a betrayal because it felt like Star Wars was being taken away from me. Like Twin Peaks: The Return didn't feel like a betrayal because Twin Peaks like never belonged to me. Like I don't dress up and run around as Agent Cooper.
Why not?
I was Anakin. I was Harry Potter. Not anymore, bro. Not anymore. Anyways, like so, it's. I feel like it's hard because you got to make your money, but but giving that art to everyone, like. Theaters are magical because they're a mass distribution method, not because they're like they're magical in and of themselves. Like I love the new ritual personally of waking up early on Friday mornings, brewing a pot of coffee and watching the new content that is out, or like the brand new movie. It's like, oh, the new David Fincher movie is out, is like at home now. I'm going to click on it and like that's my morning watching Mank.
Yeah,
and
that's how I felt when Irishman came out, dude. Like
exactly,
I was like fuck, dude. It was a weird film. Like I'm about to like it came out at midnight. I was like up, and like people are tweeting about it, and I'm like, oh shit, I can go to Netflix and just press play on the new Scorsese movie. It actually weirdly duplicated, that excitement that I felt about movies, in the theater. And we've talked about that. I mean, it's a totally different conversation in some ways, but yeah, I think it's important to sort of locate the magic that's there and not, and how the sort of relationship to the magic has evolved. Because like I've said, I mean, it's evolved in my lifetime. And part of me when I was young, and I only had a Blockbuster Video, I hated Blockbuster. I hated Blockbuster in part because I was like, they censor movies and they're like corporate, and like I hated and now I'm like longing for that like certain sort of like experience. That's the nostalgia trap for me. It's sort of like,
it's totally the nostalgia trap.
It's sort of figuring out like, well, it wasn't necessarily better or worse. There were different ways of relating to this magic. And God, if you had told me that I could have, a device in my pocket that I could access like every album. I mean, these were dreams of mine. I was a kid who craved more content, and maybe that was the wish that I got, much more than I anticipated.
This reminds me with a live stream that I saw of yours, talking about, kind of the accessibility into highbrow culture. With films,
right.
And how like knowing certain films for a time was shorthand for this is how smart I am, or like this is how cultured I am, and then Wes Anderson became a meme, like because the internet makes everything accessible, so then it's just a matter of what you do with what you access, and like how conscious you are in like engaging with the media. Like it, like I hate, like I love staying up until midnight for a release, but I hate New Music Friday. I hate the idea of like, oh, I'm going to just like click on like these things that passively interest me, listen to them once, and they're in my library forever. But like, I don't forge any sort of relationship or engage with the content, because now more often than not, the content exists to exist, not to be engaged with. And so then that's a branding thing where like you then have to have the brand of this is something that I would like to engage with. And like I said that, I don't feel sorry for people who get mad at Netflix original series. Like it's like getting a tummy ache after McDonald's. Like you know what you signed up for. Like you know exactly.
You signed up for a soap opera where you take like the big beats of a story and you spread them out over fucking 15 hours, so that like there's like certain episodes have like turning points, but most of it is just like content that doesn't even need to exist. It's just
exactly
sort of like, Tyler, this was really fun. And
my pleasure.
And it turned out to be exactly what I wanted to be, which was sort of Eraserhead. Eraserhead is a good place to start. I wanted to talk about Lynch more on the show, and I think Eraserhead is a good place to start because it's kind of like, Eraserhead is the sort of it's his artistic process, and that's so much of understanding sort of who he is as an artist, but also, like you've pointed out throughout this conversation, how much shit has evolved in terms of the business, technology, etc.
It's him in his purest form. Yeah, ultimately.
No, totally. Thank you, Tyler. We will talk to you again.
Absolutely. Take care, David.
Okay, Nostalgia Trappers, I think that is going to do it for today. I want to thank my guest, Tyler Scruggs. I had a really fun time talking Eraserhead with him. I hope you enjoyed that. Eraserhead, there really is nothing else like it. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And if you're interested in more about Lynch and his life, I can't recommend that memoir enough. It's called Room to Dream. The authors are Kristine McKenna and David Lynch. If you listen to Nostalgia Trap, you know that I'm really into life stories, memoirs, biographies. I've read a ton of them. And Room to Dream is one of the best. And I don't just say that because I love David Lynch. I think the way that they've structured the life story, the way they've sort of organized it, is really new and compelling and cool, and it really gives you a really rounded idea, I think, of what Lynch's life might mean. So this was really fun, and again, I thank Tyler Scruggs for putting all of this in perspective. Go follow him on Twitter. He's got a lot of fun stuff he's sharing. And thanks so much for all the people that are supporting the show. Patreon.com/nostalgiatrap is where you can do that. We just put up our most recent bonus episode about The Outsiders. Talked to Claudia Moreno Parsons about that, and had a really fun time doing that. And I think, we've heard a lot from you about people who read The Outsiders and watched it. I didn't really have an idea of how many people know that film. We've chosen films like Goodfellas, Eraserhead. I think those are pretty well-known films. But The Outsiders is a little bit of an outside film, and it was really fun to talk about that one. So go check that out, and thanks so much to our patrons, because it's really keeping the whole thing going at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. All right, see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.